Good afternoon. I'm Husain Haqqani, director here at the Hudson Institute for South and Central Asia, and a senior fellow. It's a pleasure to have you all here for a discussion on the US options in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Those of you who follow the news like I do probably know that this morning the United States used a relatively heavy duty. It's been described in the media as the most lethal non-nuclear bomb in the American arsenal at a location right across from the Pakistani border in Afghanistan, ostensibly to destroy a series of tunnels that were supposed to be used by ISIS in Khorasan. That brings us to an important question. The United States has been in Afghanistan since 9/11, right after 9/11. It went in to eliminate Al-Qaeda's sanctuary, which was provided by the brutal Taliban regime. 15 years later, the Taliban are still able to conduct terrorist attacks in Pakistan, reputedly from safe havens across the border in Pakistan. And the region now hosts jihadist groups affiliated with both Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Is there a permanent solution to the problem, or is it all about just managing the problem of jihadism and extremism? The Trump administration is currently conducting a policy review on how best to break the stalemate in Afghanistan. You might recall that a few days ago, General Nicholson, who commands American forces in Afghanistan, used the term stalemate. And by that he meant that while the Afghan government controls all the major cities, the Taliban are still able to cause problems and serve as a destabilizing factor in much of the countryside. So, array of options is currently being reviewed by the administration. I understand that it is already public knowledge that the National Security Advisor, General McMaster, will be traveling to Afghanistan and Pakistan within the next 2-3 days, and possibly also to India, to try and see what policies the United States must implement in the area. Among the solutions that have been put out are extreme solutions like an outright withdrawal from Afghanistan and a continuation of business as usual with Pakistan, and letting Afghanistan fall to the Taliban if it has to, because some people in Washington think that maybe Afghanistan is not as important. On the other hand, there are those who say the United States needs to fight it out in Afghanistan. And if that requires a tougher stance towards Pakistan to the extreme of designating Pakistan a state sponsor of terrorism, then so be it. Now, decisions made about policy toward Afghanistan and Pakistan will have a crucial impact on the outcome of the global war on terrorism and in dealing with Islamist extremism. And again, notwithstanding what terminology we want to use for the global war on terrorism, or whether we want to use the word Islamist extremism or not, the fact remains we all know what we are talking about. We are really fortunate today that we have two very good panelists. Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad really needs no introduction, but as you always know, when somebody says so-and-so needs no introduction, that is always the prelude to an introduction. Ambassador Khalilzad was the United States' permanent representative to the United Nations from 2007 to 2009. Prior to that, he served as U.S. ambassador to Iraq and then also U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan. He also served as United States President's special envoy to Afghanistan from 2001 to 2003. So he has been intimately connected to the project of stabilizing Afghanistan and building a democratic government there. He serves on the boards of the National Endowment for Democracy, American Abroad Media, the RAND Corporation's Middle East Studies Center, the American University of Iraq in Suleimania, and the American University of Afghanistan. Ambassador Khalilzad is a scholar, a gentleman, and may I say, a dear friend.
Thank you.
Our other panelist today is Ambassador Raphel, who is also an old friend, and she is a US diplomat with 3 decades of experience. In 1993, she was appointed as the first US Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs. Ambassador Raphel also served as US Ambassador to Tunisia. She served from 2009 to 2014 as coordinator for non-military assistance to Pakistan, and has a long history of engagement with the people of the region, who all look upon her as a friend. So let us try and have a discussion on Afghanistan and by extension Pakistan. Why is Afghanistan even important to the United States? Ambassador Khalilzad.
Well, first, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here for 2 reasons. One, I have many good friends, former colleagues, people I've worked for at Hudson, so I'm delighted to see them and to be with you. And second, I think the issue of Afghanistan and Pakistan, the war that's going on there, does not get enough attention, and there hasn't been much discussion of it in recent weeks and months. And I applaud the Hudson Institute. I know you've been very engaged and active on this issue, so delighted to be here. Congratulations to you. On the importance of Afghanistan, I believe that Afghanistan is important for several reasons. One is that the war against terror and extremism is one of the defining challenges of our time. And Afghanistan is the place from where 9/11 was planned and attacked, and we took on the role not only to bring those who perpetrated that horrible attack to justice, but also not to allow Afghanistan to become a sanctuary again. We have invested a lot in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan has come a long way. It's not the same place as it was 15 years ago. We have built a state that exists. Institutions of that state exist that didn't exist before. We have a government that is elected and is recognized widely as a legitimate government of Afghanistan. And it is in a region where a lot of important things are going on besides being one of the centers of extremism and terror. And we want to, I think it's in our interest to be able to interact, shape, and engage that region, and our presence in Afghanistan provides us with that opportunity. I believe that the war against terror will be a multi-generational struggle, and in that struggle we have a role to play, and being in Afghanistan and success in Afghanistan would put us in a stronger position to deal with the broader challenge. Right now, as ISIS is being defeated in Iraq and Syria, the ISIS is trying to find other places to go to, and one of the areas that they are targeting is Afghanistan. And that's this morning's attack, Washington time. So I believe for reasons of geopolitics, for reasons of war against terror, for reasons of the long struggle as the Islamic civilization works its crisis out, being in Afghanistan and succeeding in Afghanistan is important. Now, Afghanistan has difficulties, certainly, and we will obviously talk about those. But I think at the time that Afghanistan faces challenges, we have to recognize the progress that it has made, and that if we fail in Afghanistan, and those who will work with us are abandoned, what lesson does that leave for others in this bigger struggle that we're talking about more broadly that is taking place? We have good friends, partners in Afghanistan. While there are risks in the region from the changes that are taking place, there are opportunities as well. And so I'm a strong believer, not in the option of abandoning and letting Taliban win, not in the option of just leaving things as they are. I'm in favor of changing the balance on the ground, which from one of being a stalemate that has favored the Taliban in recent months to one of favoring the government and the coalition. So I'm encouraged by what I hear about what's going on in terms of the review to weaken the adversaries, to strengthen the government, to strengthen it not only militarily but economically and politically, but also to review the policy towards Pakistan, because I think one of the big problems of Afghanistan is the policies of Pakistan, the sanctuary policies. We have treated the sanctuaries as sanctuaries. We should not, in my judgment, treat them as sanctuaries. As far as we're concerned, they shouldn't be accepted as sanctuaries. If we are attacked from those places or from leaders who are based in those places, and they order attack against U.S. forces, they order attacks against coalition forces, they attack against Afghan civilians, they attack against Afghan military, we should say that they will not be treated as sanctuaries from our point of view, that they would be legitimate targets for a response. We should, in my view, try to see if there can be some understanding reached between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Pakistan is an important country, has a legitimate interest. Those legitimate interests ought to be respected, but we have to get to what those legitimate interests are and try to see if the Afghans could get to accommodate those. And perhaps we have to do something to shake things up in order to get to that discussion.
Let's come to that in a little bit, because
Sure.
I have some of the ideas that you
Okay.
have mooted,
Great.
some others have mooted and all that. We'll go into that. But before
Once you get me started,
yeah,
it's
no, I know.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. It's good to have you started.
Yeah.
But let's ask Ambassador Raphel if she agrees, A, with the importance of Afghanistan as stated by Ambassador Khalilzad, and B, the winning strategy, or do you feel that muddling through is the best option, and since that's already happening, why can't we just declare victory and leave?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Husain, for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be on the stage here with such very illustrious colleagues, both of whom I've known a long time and had the various highest regard for the work that they've done. To answer your question here, in the first instance, I agree with everything that Ambassador Khalilzad has said about the importance of Afghanistan. Clearly, it's very important. And in addition to the list of reasons that he has, I would add one very important one, and that is the commitment that we've made both implicitly and explicitly to the people of Afghanistan. I think that's extremely important. Ambassador Khalilzad referred to the kinds of progress that we've made. We have made some. Some of it hasn't been sustained, but there is a beginning, and it would really be a shame to let it drop and a bad signal to everyone. So I think that's really very important. And it's important to remember that the reason we want development and better governance in Afghanistan is that ultimately we believe that that will bring stability, inclusion, and so on, which will bring us much further along the path to our goals in Afghanistan. Now, in terms of what the U.S. government ought to do, I'm much more a middle-of-the-road person. I don't go for one extreme or the other. Clearly, we shouldn't walk away. That would be absolutely wrong in my view, given the investment that we've made, given the importance of the region. So I really don't consider that an option. By the same token, I don't consider all-out war, against Pakistan and other neighbors, and considering the whole region a battlefield, the best solution either. In my own view, and I side with, I know there are different sides to this argument, but I'm a believer that at the end of the day, there has to be a negotiated political solution in Afghanistan, which will undoubtedly include bringing some of the conservative elements, the Taliban and so on, into some sort of position in the government. I think eventually the idea would be that in time they would have less influence and less authority because the people would in time move away from some of the more conservative ideologies and so on. But I think in the first instance, a political solution is necessary. In terms of how you bring people to the table, we can talk about that later. It's complicated. I realize that. There have been many attempts that haven't worked out all that well, but I think it's an essential element here.
Well, I used to have a teacher who always told me that if something hasn't happened in 20 years, first figure out why it didn't happen in 20 years before you can figure out how to do it yourself. So here's my question. Okay, everybody's been saying this since 1993 when the Taliban first surfaced, or 1994. We need to figure out how to make them some part of Afghanistan's political milieu, and recognize that they represent a hardcore, conservative Pashtun element in Afghan society. Why has it not worked? Why have, for example, all the efforts between 1994 and before 9/11 to try and talk to them, all the efforts that have gone in between, are we just chasing a pipe dream of bringing people to the table who really don't want to sit on the table, and who might actually be persuaded to talk only when they feel that they have no other option but to talk? Ambassador Khalilzad, you seem to have that perspective as well, like myself. I personally don't think that the Taliban are as easily reconcilable as those who say that, we should just have a political... I agree, there should be a political solution, but who will the political solution be between? And I refer you to an article you wrote in the Wall Street Journal in June 2016, in which you said, and the title of the article was Breaking the Pakistan-Taliban Alliance, which basically posited the concept that the alliance between Pakistan and the Taliban was the real problem, not the Taliban per se, who can be talked to as a local extreme player or an Afghan internal issue. And the words you used, this was right after Mullah Akhtar Mansoor had been hit. So what you were saying a little while ago about America being a little more robust in conducting military operations on the Pakistani side of the Afghan-Pakistan border, that had happened. And your words were, this is a golden hour, which can help the United States finally secure Islamabad's help in stopping Al-Qaeda-linked terrorists and the Taliban. Why did you consider it a golden hour? Do you think the golden hour has been missed?
I think that the golden hour was missed. I think we did get Pakistan's attention with the strike. I believe that some people in the administration had the view that if that strike had been followed by additional strikes against other targets, and Pakistan had been talked to or communicated to, that further steps would be taken with regard to not accepting the sanctuary anymore. And along with that, a push for some sort of Afghan-Pakistani reconciliation or agreement would have been pursued, perhaps there may have been an opportunity. But the president decided, President Obama, in my judgment, to leave the problem, that decision, to the next, to his successor. And the successor is now grappling with what to do, but in a position that has become far more difficult. A position that where the American withdrawal, very substantial withdrawal, the success of Afghanistan, in part is that there was at one time over 120,000 foreign troops in Afghanistan fighting, and now there is less than 15,000 foreign troops, 8,000 something Americans. So from about 100,000 Americans, we're down to less than 10,000. And there were restrictions imposed on the commander as to what he could or couldn't do, that the focus would be largely helping the Afghans.
Weren't the restrictions primarily not to provoke Pakistan and not to upset it?
Well, essentially was that the Afghans will take the lead or to the fighting against Taliban. The U.S. concerns will be Al-Qaeda, and then we added ISIS to the target, and thus the attack today in part is within a framework that had changed already. My judgment is that we had a golden hour. I don't want to just blame the Obama administration.
You also mentioned
that during
after 9/11.
9/11 we had an opportunity where we had the world's attention. People knew we were very determined, that we were serious. And even President Musharraf, who's in town or will be in town, I understand, said he reluctantly acceded to our demand, and that with regard to the Taliban, our attack in Afghanistan, and that he was very clever in terms of then denying that there was a sanctuary that he was allowing in Pakistan. In fact, President Bush sent me once to talk to him, and he flatly told me there are no Taliban in Pakistan. Give me their phone numbers, give me their addresses. I said, Mr. President, the leadership is called the Quetta Shura, and Quetta, I understand, is in Balochistan and Pakistan City, and the other is called the Peshawar Shura. And you're asking me to give you their names and their phone numbers and their addresses. So, and because of a variety of issues, we didn't take advantage of that hour. But I believe, like Robin, that the ultimate answer is a political reconciliation. There's no doubt about that. That's how it has to end. But the question is, what are the conditions that are needed to get to a political settlement? It's not that the Afghan government hasn't tried very hard to get to a political settlement. The Afghan government has tried to reach out to the Taliban, has tried to reach out to Pakistan, in particular this government, at enormous cost to itself. President Ghani went to Pakistan, went to the military headquarters, put a freeze on relations, security relations with India, made statements that were not very popular in Afghanistan, given Pakistan's recent record, although Afghans remember fondly Pakistan's role with regard to the Soviet period, where the hospitality shown by Pakistan, the support shown, all of that over time was dissipated. So what are the conditions that you need? You can't really have reconciliation if the insurgency feels that the time is on its side. You can't have a successful negotiations if there is safe sanctuary. They say, you can't have a successful negotiation if they think the Americans are going to leave. That increase your commitment and you put a deadline on it immediately, that the commitment you've made for increased effort will end within a year. You can't get good conditions if you say Taliban are not our problem, Taliban are your problem to the Afghan government. So so I mean, I could go through a litany of what I would regard as factors that on our part, maybe on the Afghan government part, I can't speak as much about them, that has sustained the insurgency in a sense by what we have signaled. Because if we say you're not my enemy, I'm not going to target you, you've allowed the insurgency to go on. If you say you respect the sanctuary, you won't attack it, you have allowed the insurgency to go on. So I would say that this administration, in my view, needs to adjust some of those things. It needs to, first of all, strengthen the military balance so that the balance does not shift against the government any further. That is a must. That's the baseline. The military balance has to change, and it has to change in favor of the government so that the insurgency doesn't believe that time is on its side. That's one. Two, Pakistan has to confront some of these choices. We, as the country, as a sovereign nation, we have the right of self-defense. If from bases in another country, we are attacked, as much as Pakistan is a sovereign country, we are also a sovereign country. We have the right to defend ourselves. It's a principle of international law. We are there under UN Security Council resolution to begin with, and now at the invitation of the Afghan government based on a bilateral agreement. So we should not be accepting a safe sanctuary. As a sanctuary should not be acceptable to the United States. We ought to make that very, very clear. And I hope that H.R. McMaster will make that point when he sits across the table when he is in Islamabad. On the other hand, we should be respectful of Pakistan's legitimate interests. I am not in favor of a kind of war region-wide. We should respect Pakistan's legitimate interests. They have given 2 documents to the U.S. government about their interests in the past. You may be familiar with them.
I was an intermediary on both occasions.
Yeah, right. And they have given a document to the Afghans as to what their list of requirements are. Now, I think we ought to release those documents. I called today that those documents ought to be released so that the world can see what is it that Pakistan's legitimate interest definitions are. So the Afghan people can see what is the definition of a legitimate interest. Are those legitimate interests that they are putting in those documents? I'm not in a position to talk about
We'll
that.
come to Pakistan's legitimate interests versus psychological interests later.
You're right.
You mentioned them in your great book, The Envoy, which I must commend you on. We haven't had a public function for you here since you came out with the book, and I commend it to the audience.
Thank you.
Because it does describe I'm somebody who's represented Pakistan, and there are moments when I have had this problem as well, that, are we actually asking for something specific, or do we have some vague fears in mind? So it does create a problem. We'll come to that in a second. But Robin, before we come to that, what is your sort of middle of the road explanation for what's gone on for the last quarter century in Afghanistan and Pakistan, especially in relation to the Taliban?
Okay. I'll begin with your question, and then I want to respond to some of the things that Salah said. It's not, what I would say in simple terms, it's not just a problem of the military not succeeding and therefore there not being enough troops or, enough commitment or enough money or whatever. It's not just that.
Right.
I think many observers agree that the Taliban wouldn't be as successful, I mean, it's not hugely successful, but as successful as it's been without some kind of support from the population. it's not just the safe havens on the Pakistan side, although those are clearly a problem. There's some problem internal to Afghanistan that allows the Taliban to continue to prosper to the degree it does. And, among other things, as much as the Afghan government, and, obviously, they really try hard. I mean, Ashraf Ghani, sleeps 3 hours a night or whatever, works terribly, terribly hard, and thinks terribly, terribly hard about how to improve things in the country. But he hasn't been able to extend the writ of the Kabul government throughout Afghanistan. So that has left opportunity for the Taliban to take up space. So there's a political problem internally as well as a military problem.
Minor question here. You didn't answer the question of then the Quetta Shura, the Peshawar Shura, the period between 9/11 and 2005, because after all, Afghanistan was devastated by the civil war that preceded, then it was further devastated by the American bombing, etc.
Right.
And yet the Taliban fell and kind of folded. So this argument that they have internal support, I'll just read a sentence from Ral's piece, which said, Taliban's resilience is primarily due to the strategic decision of the Pakistani military and intelligence services to provide sanctuary and support to these groups. What those who say that, I think, are suggesting that yes, there would be religious conservatism in Afghanistan, but Sayyaf represents religious conservatism and he's part of the government. And so what about the Taliban movement as such, which came out of nowhere in 1993-94?
Well, my point was merely that the current government in Afghanistan, again, and I hate to criticize them because I know how hard people work, but it isn't working terribly well in many places, and people are fed up with corruption.
And all these places are only along the Pakistan border.
Sorry?
Are all these places only along the Pakistan border?
No, I'm just making the point that there are reasons other than military reasons that the Taliban have made some inroads. That's all. Now, the earlier period, you've heard the complaints a million times from the Pakistanis and others that we pushed the Taliban towards Pakistan, and then we got distracted in other ways. So, I think that was a consideration. Iraq and so on, that was a consideration at the time. I certainly agree with Zal that we cannot say that we're going to leave, or say we're going to surge and then leave as we've done in other places, and expect any serious cooperation from the Taliban. That just won't work. And I also agree, and this is a very, very important point, and I think it was made by Ambassador Rick Olson in an editorial the other day, which was, we cannot simply say to the Afghans that this is your problem, that we got into a mantra of Afghan-owned, Afghan-led in terms of a negotiation, reconciliation process, and that just was not practical. We have to own up to the fact that we're parties to this whole problem. And my view is that the U.S. has to exercise far more leadership in trying to get a negotiation going.
That you were, yeah.
Well, the 2 points. One, of course, the key thing from an American perspective is what is our objective? And then is there a good relationship between that objective and the strategy that we follow? Is there a good ends and means relationship? And at times we have talked very ambitiously, and the means have not been consistent with it. And of course, since we are in the middle of we're in a city that is in the middle of a significant review, I hope that the administration will keep that in mind as to that. Now, on the negotiations and the insurgency, I believe that in a lot of countries in that area, there's potential for instability. And for example, I could speak extensively about the problems of Pakistan. I could talk about the ethnic problems, Balochistan. I could talk about the problem between the civilian government and the military government. I could talk about the Pakistani Taliban and the threat they pose. I could talk about the various other groups that are active there. And if then I could say to Afghans, together with the Indians, that they should allow opposition groups, arm them, provide them with safe haven, and then whitewash that to a degree, not that Robin is doing that, by saying, well, Pakistan has problems, the government has problems, the civilian government really doesn't control anything. It's the military that controls everything. Well, at one level, that's obviously true. What Robin says is obviously true about Afghanistan. The government has issues. This was a state that was totally destroyed, at nothing. As someone who went there after 9/11, I can tell you what the situation was. And it has come a long way. But how do you come a long way in an environment where you're more powerful by numerically, militarily, is out to undermine you? There is no other word for it, unfortunately. That there is I can assure you that besides providing sanctuary, I know this for a fact, there is subcontracting of attacks that's taking place by the security establishment. That they give people money to go attack this target, and you get the second half of the money when you have accomplished that task. Now, how do you deal with an environment like that other than that what we have in Afghanistan? Yes, the Afghan government has governance issues. It must address those. There are people in this room who have spent time dealing with these issues. But in an environment where the security situation is as difficult as it is, and you can't say the Afghans are not fighting hard, their sacrifices of the Afghan forces is enormous. I mean, the number of soldiers, policemen who are killed in Afghanistan, and yet they were hoping that that force would collapse by now because of the U.S. withdrawal. It has not happened. So I am very sympathetic, personally, to the idea that the mother of the problems here, we're talking about the mother of the bombs, today was dropped in Afghanistan. The mother of the problems of Afghanistan is the sanctuary issue. Because...
So you don't think that the child doesn't exist? The child does exist.
Yes.
But the mother is on the other side.
Other side, because people, Mullah Omar died in a hospital in Karachi. How does he get to a hospital in Karachi? Someone who's on our list as someone that we were after. Is this a state sponsorship?
We'll come to that because you've talked about it also in a report.
I mean, we can't solve a problem until we recognize it for what it is. We may say it's too hard. We have to find another way to deal with it. But you can't sugarcoat it by saying as if it doesn't exist. The problem does exist, but what are the ways effectively to deal with it?
Ambassador Raphel, you have generally been reluctant to be as critical of Pakistan as many other Americans are willing to, and I understand that because we do need people who are intermediaries. We need Pakistanis who can serve as intermediaries between Pakistan and the United States instead of every Pakistani who talks to Americans being burnt back home. So I understand that, but
no. She's I don't know.
But the point I would like you to address is there a way to address Pakistan's quote unquote legitimate concerns about Afghanistan, and then get Pakistan to work with the U.S. in the same direction? Because so far it seems, at least Ambassador Khalilzad seems convinced, and I must say that I also have similar views, that the Pakistani side has actually aggravated the Taliban problem for Afghanistan, for the United States, and for itself. And look, here I must say that while Ambassador Khalilzad was talking about the sacrifices of the Afghan military, I should say that we should also recognize the sacrifices of the Pakistani
Absolutely. I agree
military
with
in
you.
fighting terrorists inside Pakistan.
Right.
That said, Pakistan has positioned itself on the horns of a dilemma. It fights certain terrorists and it does not fight other terrorists, and that includes the Afghan Taliban. And that has been the real problem. So how does one nudge Pakistan first into acknowledging that that's what has happened? Okay, they can say we didn't do it deliberately, but it has happened. I mean, we didn't want to support these guys, but since they were Afghan refugees, we had large numbers of them. They were all in Pakistan. They organized themselves. They created a shura for themselves, etc., etc. How do we make sure that they do not remain the organized Pakistan-based force that they have become? And how does America do that so that both Afghanistan and Pakistan can find security and both can find prosperity?
Very good question. First of all, I would say I'm not reluctant to criticize Pakistan. I just like to criticize them in a rational fashion, and I think sometimes that's not exactly what happens.
Okay, fair enough.
And I would say that I think part of the problem here, and of course, the safe havens, the sanctuaries are a huge problem. There's no doubt about it. All I was arguing is that they are not the only problem.
Fair enough.
I
think we can all agree on that.
That is a factual.
We can all agree on that.
Oh, sure. I just said that they have this problem. That's sure.
And I think with regard to Pakistan, you have a bit of a chicken-egg problem here. The Pakistanis are hedging. I mean, we all know that. That's why they let the safe havens continue. That's why the Haqqani network is still there, and so on and so forth. Well, why are they hedging? I think they're hedging because they don't know which direction things are trending in Afghanistan. First we're
for
going to
15 years they've been hedging. Yes.
Yes. Well,
is there any way to assure them?
No, for 15. Well, more than that. But
No, I'm just saying since we were there. Now I'm.
Okay, so they've been hedging, but for 15 years they haven't known which way things are going to turn out in Afghanistan. And I think that what we need to think about is how can we make it clear our policy and how we think things are going forward. So the Pakistanis have a fixed or relatively fixed point against which to determine their policy and judge what they ought to be doing. As long as it's not clear, I would guess, you have to ask them, but they'll continue to hedge. And of course, what the Pakistanis are most afraid of, and whether it's right or wrong, or accurate or inaccurate, they are concerned, I believe, that we will leave prematurely, and that the Indians will take America's place as a predominant power, influence in Afghanistan, and that they will be left scrambling. So they're hedging. Now, you can say till you're blue in the face that that's not accurate, but I think that is a perception there, which accounts for the hedging. So we need to be clear.
Look, I don't want to fall into Sean Spicer's trap of historic comparisons, but are we arguing that somebody really believed that Czechoslovakia and Poland had to be annexed to Germany because they were threats to Germany's security, and so therefore they kind of had the right to move in? I think that Pakistan has been a lot more, shall we say, aggressive in organizing the Taliban on the Pakistani side. Even the election of Mullah Haibatullah Akhund, the announcement said the Shura met in Peshawar to elect Mullah Mansour's successor. So those things, I think hedging is maybe not adequate to describe what is happening in my country. I think it's an ideological preoccupation rather than just hedging. Hedging one can address. One can talk to them and say, hey, we will be the guarantors. We can get the Russians in. We can get the Chinese in. We can get the whole world in. We can get the United Nations to guarantee that the Indians will not come into Afghanistan. Afghanistan will provide that guarantee. That proposal was mooted a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's true.
But that is not acceptable. So Ambassador Khalilzad wrote once that he feels that Pakistan's terms for a new bilateral relationship with Afghanistan amounted to Afghanistan subordinating its sovereignty to Pakistan.
I wish those papers would be released, and I think if they were, that's the result. My judgment.
As someone who has read the paper, the point is, so how do we get around that? I mean, one can deal with real and substantive issues without going blue in the face or whatever. What do you do if something is not really something that can be reduced to substantive? To anything substantive. I mean, what is the threat? Okay, are there Indian military bases in Afghanistan? There will be no bases. We can remove them. Espionage centers, maybe the Americans can work together with the Pakistanis to eliminate them, etc. But if at the end the whole thing is that no, we won't be happy till every Afghan stops listening to a Bollywood song, that may be too difficult to deliver.
Sure. Well, I mean, first as I've said repeatedly, I think Pakistan has a legitimate interest as a sovereign country. That has to be respected by everyone, ourselves included, Afghans as well. We have to get to those, what they are. And as I said, and I've written this in my book, when President Bush asked me to go to talk to President Musharraf, and I sat with him, he was very hospitable. And I asked him after some niceties about what was bothering him about this new Afghanistan. Because I said to him that my mission from the president is to help deal with those issues. The president has instructed me to find out what his concerns are and then work on dealing with them. And he raised two issues with me, and I will just quickly say those. One, he said the Indian consulates. He mentioned. And I said, what about the Indian consulate? He said, well, they're used for espionage and for support of Pakistani insurgents. And I said, Mr. President, to the best of my knowledge, these are mud houses, so this in Kandahar and Jalalabad. But since you're a great friend of the United States, the President has high regards for you, I'll make you an offer. Send me some ISI officers. And I said in those words, I'll put some CIA folks with them. And we will do a virtual occupation of those consulates. And I promise you that since your people will be with our people, if I discover that they are smuggling weapons into Balochistan or some such thing, we'll shut them down. I'm sorry, I'm sure this would not be pleasant for the Afghan friends to hear that I would say we would shut them down. And he said,
although that might be a good solution.
Well, he extended his hand, I won't forget, saying, wow, a deal. I said, all right, sir. I said, what else is bothering you, Mr. President, about this new Afghanistan, where your friends are the preeminent outside powers there, the Americans? And he said, the Afghans want to build a dam on Kuna River, and that's going to affect our agriculture in Punjab and water. I said, Mr. President, I live in Afghanistan now, and I deal every day with the Afghan government. There is no such plan that I am aware of, that they are about to build a dam to block Pakistan's water. It's a huge project. They're working on smaller things at this time. But why don't we do something, get the World Bank or USAID, or there are water issues between Afghanistan and Iran, you and India, to do a technical feasibility study. I mean, there are solutions, precedents. I said, great, all right. So that's it? He said, oh, I have one other thing. I said, what's that, Mr. President? He said, you're not fighting the Pashtuns correctly. I said, that's outside my lane, but what are you talking about? And he said, you're not using enough force, or they don't react well to this very discriminating going into the homes. You should be using tanks and artillery and so on. And I said, Mr. President, that's not my lane. I had people from our side. I said, they have heard you. They perhaps will take your advice into account. But I'm not done yet. I said, now that you're finished, can I ask you something in return? He said, what? I said, what about these Taliban And I told the rest of that story already. So it's very hard to get to the kind of core concern. If those were the core concern, in exchange for which he was willing to take something, I certainly was in a position to be helpful to make that progress. Our relationship with President Karzai was very strong. He was very open to suggestions. In fact, the day before I went, and some of you may not know it, he called President Musharraf, and he said to him that I know the American ambassador is coming to see you. Whatever you agree with him is agreeable. I agree with it as well.
Now, are they negotiating in good faith?
Wait a minute, I'm not done yet. Yeah, what I would say is that this hedging thing led the United States to sign in 2005 a partnership agreement with Afghanistan to say, to signal to Pakistan, we're not going to abandon that. I got, and Skura Libby is here, who was a senior advisor. The President of the United States repeatedly, because of this concern, said, we will not make the mistake we made in Afghanistan and after the Soviet withdrawal to abandon it. We will not abandon Afghanistan again. And he signed a strategic partnership agreement. Under the Obama administration, we signed a couple of other agreements to show a commitment long-term to Afghanistan. So what are they hedging against? I know that we can say, well, we can change our mind one day. But if you start hedging, everybody in the world hedges against all kinds of potential unlikely scenarios, then where will the world be? This becomes self-fulfilling then. You hedge that India is going to take over Afghanistan, so therefore I must control Afghanistan. Then it's pushing Afghanistan in the very directions that the Pakistanis say they don't want. The more Pakistan follows hostile policies towards Afghanistan, the more Afghanistan moves in the direction of closer relations with India. And I believe that maybe this is a problem that we can't solve. I certainly am willing to admit to that even the policy that I would favor may not produce the results that we seek. But we must try that before we come to a judgment, in my view, to see what the legitimate interests are. Can we get to that? Can we deal with it? Can we increase both the risks of the current policy to Pakistan, and if they are willing to change, increase the reward for them? I think we have to have a higher risk, higher reward mixed in dealing with this issue.
So that's the point we'll come to next, but before that,
no, I totally agree that we need to try.
Right.
I'm a glass half full person. I think
Right.
it's possible. So
Right.
I don't think anything's impossible. But all of these things about the Indian consulate,
Right.
which is code word for whatever India was doing
Right.
in Afghanistan. Water sharing on the Kannar River, it is an issue. It's a problem, and it needs to be dealt with from both sides' point of view. How you fight the Pashtuns, another matter altogether. But that, I would make the point that those things haven't been persistently followed through on. So here we are 10 years later, or whenever your conversation was in 2017, and it's not, I don't believe it's clear to the Pakistanis what our policy and plans are. And I don't think it's not clear to me either. I mean, I realize we're in a transition period, and the new administration has to get its ducks in a row, and that's all fine. But I think it isn't clear, and therefore hedging, and you're absolutely right, everybody's done it from time immemorial, is likely to continue. But I think if we
what can the U.S. say that will stop them from hedging and going after the safe haven?
But it's exactly what Zal was talking about, revisiting a conversation where you say very candidly, what are your...
But that conversation was had, according to Zal, and
yes,
it didn't have any effect. So why will it have an effect now?
Because there's a lot of water under the bridge since the time that conversation was had.
But the same conversation was had 8 years before that, and
Later,
a lot of water had gone under the bridge by the time Zal came on the scene. So my point is, do we keep having that conversation every 8 years?
First question, yes, we do. Second element, however, the second element is, however, that things evolve everywhere. There are shifting sands in the region and so on. And I think it's possible you might get some nuance of a different response from the Pakistanis if you tried that again now. And in any case, it's worth trying.
Okay. Well, I mean, in my book, Magnificent Delusions, I cite something very interesting. So I came upon a paper that General Ayub Khan presented to President Eisenhower in 1959. And I compared that paper about Pakistan's concerns on Afghanistan. At that time, there were no US forces in Afghanistan. There were no Soviet forces in Afghanistan. This is 1959. By the way, just for the record, I was only 3 years old. So I wasn't involved in that particular conspiracy, especially for the Pakistani media.
And everyone since then.
Yeah. And then I compared that with the famous paper that General Kiani wrote for President Obama. And of course, there were certain paragraphs that had changed because they were talking about more recent events, but the rest of the arguments were the same. So I am the only Pakistani at this podium, and I'm somehow not convinced that you keep having the same conversation. And just because more water has gone under the bridge, something has to happen that will make people who do not think that the world changes, and therefore they need to change too. Something has to happen, is just my 2 cents worth, but we'll move on. Ambassador Khalilzad.
Sir.
In October 2016, 5 former ambassadors and 2 former generals who had all served in Afghanistan. The ambassadors were James Cunningham, James Dobbins, Ryan Crocker, Ron Newman, and yourself, and former generals Petraeus and McChrystal, and then people with intelligence backgrounds and analysis like Bruce Ryder. You all prepared a report titled Forging an Enduring Partnership with Afghanistan. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
I'm almost doing it as in a court of law. And it actually made some very harsh recommendations, and I'll just run through them, and then I'll let both of you sort of comment on them before we open it to the public. Point number 1 was that the US could take further steps to pressure Taliban sanctuaries within Pakistan, with or without the support of Islamabad. This was the recommendation. Second recommendation was that the Obama administration Congress had already started reducing coalition support funds to Pakistan, but even today's reduced amounts of US assistance should be cut further. The third was targeted economic sanctions could be selectively applied against certain specific organizations and individuals. We can come to what organizations you have in mind. I have a few in mind, but we shall not go there right away. And then the fourth, and the most important, was Pakistan could even be designated as a state sponsor of terrorism, a finding that would not only be embarrassing to the country, but also harmful to its economic prospects given the likely influence on potential investors. Some people found these too harsh. That's why they did not become part of policy at that moment. I believe that they are being considered again by the current administration. Explain each one of them, and why do you support them? And why do you think they would have the desired effect?
Well, the very title of the paper was in response to what my friend and colleague Robin has said, that the belief that Pakistan is hedging, perhaps, that it's uncertain whether the U.S. is going to stick around because of some of the approaches of the previous administration, in which it would announce some increase and then announce simultaneously that the time at which that force will come out, that maybe there is a need for an enduring commitment to Afghanistan and maintaining that commitment with forces, not only for reasons of Afghanistan, but perhaps also for the broader war on terror, that especially as this would be a multi-generational, perhaps, struggle. Now, the Afghan government has taken the view, in order to facilitate negotiations, I don't know, I think the Obama administration may have been okay with this, that if the issue of U.S. presence is an obstacle to negotiations or peace, that they are willing to put that on the table as to under what conditions, if there was peace, the U.S. could perhaps totally withdraw. Now, there obviously among those of us who were participating in this discussion, there may have been difference of view whether regardless we should maintain some force or we shouldn't. That's a separate issue. So that was one. Two, with regard to pressuring the sanctuary itself, the point has been that many of us believe that if the sanctuary is not put at risk, or if, to put it in the other way, if it is put at risk, that might motivate Pakistan to not to allow it on their territory.
You don't think it will harden Pakistan's resolve to stick to its policies?
Well, I'm not, of course, one that rules it out. I don't know for sure. It would be presumptuous of me to know how committed is Pakistan to this policy. But certainly the price will go up, the risk will go up. I don't think Pakistan was very happy that this attack took place against Mullah Mansour on its territory. They were quite worried about it. Even there is the issue of if you even had to do it, why didn't you do it while he was in another country, so to speak, rather than doing it in Pakistan?
Because he was going back and forth between Iran and Pakistan.
Right, for example.
Which is another country with sanctuary laws.
Right, we can talk about that. And all of the steps that we were outlining there for the administration, it wasn't really for the Obama administration. What the paper was written more for during the election and for the next administration, because we were all in the know that the Obama administration, the policy was to hand it off without a collapse to the next administration, is to how do you incentivize Pakistan? What are the range of tools available to the United States government to incentivize Pakistan to engage seriously on a negotiated
more sticks than carrots, or carrots and sticks?
Personally, in this case, we were talking more about sticks, but I have personally believed that we need to first get their attention, that business as usual isn't going to work anymore.
Designation as state sponsor of terrorism?
We'll consider the designation. We didn't say it should be done. It should be considered if these other steps have not produced results. But I'm of the view, continued view of the view, that we should be active, as Robin said, in trying to see if something could be worked out between Afghanistan and Pakistan on the issues that separate them. We should be a catalyst. At the same time, we should be pressuring more to incentivize, because I think the problem is more with Pakistan than with Afghanistan. I believe that because I know that on Afghan territory, Pakistani Taliban get killed by us, by Afghans. They get arrested and handed over to the Pakistanis. So I believe that the problem is more on balance on the other side. And therefore, we have to put more pressure, more costs with them. But if they cooperate, we should signal that we will put a lot more on the table for help and assistance and stronger relationship with Pakistan. I think that would be my recommendation for this administration. But in order to do that,
higher cost, higher reward.
Higher reward, and maybe you need a intervening variable or factor to create the golden hour that you have indicated that you're serious, and that may be going after some of the sanctuaries first. Now, I think some people will say, no, let's not do that at the beginning. Let's do that later. But I believe you have to get their attention that you're serious, and for that you may have to do a series, not a single kind of one, and then follow that with the kind of policy that I've outlined.
Final question to you before I move to Ambassador Raphel, and then we open it to the public. What do you say to those who say that, you know what, Pakistan is a nuclear-armed country,
Sure.
It does not yield to pressure easily,
Right.
Its military is by and large in charge, and they calculate, and that in the past, whenever pressure has been applied, they have been able to resist it.
Sure.
And therefore, these pressure ideas are wrong. Yes, we have a problem in getting them to do what we want, but let's just keep doing what we are doing because that's the only option we have. What do you say to that?
Well, those are all facts. We can't dispute that Pakistan is a nuclear power. Pakistan has a strong military. Pakistan, the military does decide foreign policy issues. No country would like to be pressured. Pakistan would not like to be pressured. I accept all that. Those are all reasonable proposition. For us, in my view, that's where I come to our objective and our strategy. For us, in my judgment, then we face two other options. Then the option is then to harden Afghanistan against this, which will take longer, be costlier. The Arabs have not accepted Israel. It's not a good analogy. At least most of them still have not. Some of them have. But yet Israel took a lot of effort. It's a different environment. I'm just giving it not as a similarity. You have to keep strengthening Afghan institutions, perhaps accelerating some things. We were slow in building Afghan security forces and we went in there so that they can resist better, deal with some of the problems that Robin was talking about, which becomes harder in an environment in which the insurgency is making progress. You harden Afghanistan against it, and you keep the current level or higher level of pressure on Pakistan in the hope that maybe future Pakistani leaders, whether military or civilian, could decide. That is if we are committed to success in Afghanistan, for not abandoning Afghanistan, for not giving up on our objective, those are, I think, the two paths, or some mix of the two. Which I would favor. You keep the hardening part, you strengthen the Afghan security forces, because I think that's a huge asset that we have built in Afghan security and armed forces that can do a lot of things we were doing in large numbers, taking a lot more casualties than we are doing now. You do continue to do that and do the pressure and testing of Pakistan and work for a reconciliation and a settlement. But if Pakistan is unwilling, I'm not advocating that we go to nuclear war with them over this issue.
Okay, Ambassador Raphel.
Let me first say that we should indeed continue to harden Afghanistan. I would argue more on the governance side, or at least the same on the governance side, because that's necessary in any case for sustainability in Afghanistan. It's not easy to do. Many people have worked on this process, and it takes time, but it's essential to continue it. Demonstrating to Pakistan that we're serious, I absolutely agree with this, but I think we need to demonstrate that in the first instance, we're serious about a way forward in Afghanistan that takes account of their interests and is credible, feasible, and so on.
Sure.
You start there. If you really get nowhere, and I don't think this has been anywhere near fully tried, if you really get nowhere, then you consider other options. You just have to bear in mind that, if you go into the sanctions in Pakistan, you might, just for the sake of balance, go into the sanctuaries in Afghanistan, which I know we've been doing in part because we're based there and have forces there and so on and so forth. On some of the other things that you listed from the October 16 report, decreasing CSF. To a degree, we've already done that, the military assistance program. And I think the guide to us should be, to the U.S., is that money getting us what we want? And if it's not, and I know this sounds very transactional, I think it should be exactly that. If it doesn't get us what we want, then we decrease it. As the Pakistanis often remind us, it's reimbursement for things that they've expended, things that they've done. We are not getting that. Why should we pay? I think that's perfectly fair. In terms of targeted economic sanctions, we need to bear in mind that the fundamental reason that we do economic development, whether it's Pakistan, Afghanistan, or any other way, any other country, it's enlightened self-interest. We do it to accelerate inclusive development, economic growth, opportunities for employment, all these things which we believe, and I do, well, the development community does, will bring political progress and stability. And that's in our interest. So I think you have to be careful when you talk about using economic assistance as a coercion, that it's really your interest that you're talking about there over the longer term. State sponsor of terrorism, I don't think that would be particularly productive. But again, I'd reiterate, where we need to begin, as much as we might have done it before, is a serious conversation where we are, project confidence that we know what we're doing and that it makes sense, and then see how the Pakistanis respond.
Okay, well, we have about 15 minutes for questions. So I'm going to take only questions. Anybody who wants to make a speech, wait for it and go back home and do it there. So, Ambassador Teresita Schaefer.
Thank you, Hussein, and thank you all for a stimulating afternoon. We finally, in the last two answers, started to get to the subject, which is U.S. options. And essentially, there were two that were looked at, two paths. One was build everything on Pakistan, basically as a strategic alliance, which you might call in shorthand the Holbrooke model, and squeeze Pakistan until it falls in line with our strategic objectives, which I assume is one of those under consideration now. A third one was brought up, namely harden Afghanistan against all the things that could go wrong. I will abide by Hussein's admonition not to make a speech, though I'd love to. But let me ask you this. If we were to decide, contrary to both of your recommendation, that the United States decide to let nature take its course in Afghanistan, what would happen, and is not that the result that we have to beat, and beat hopefully by a significant margin?
Well, if we did that, which I do not favor, we would be back to the situation perhaps of the 1990s. We've been there, we've seen this movie, we've been there and done that. The Clinton administration, which Robin was a part of and I was helping from outside, did that. Let nature take its own course. We were even
as hard as we tried not to.
But you tried. But you know the reality. I could tell lots of stories about that if you want.
But Ambassador Khalilzad, may I put a footnote here? Yeah. Actually, it wasn't nature taking its course purely in Afghanistan, because Pakistan was helping nature take that particular course.
So it's not that we haven't been there and done that. But that involves risks, and as a nation, we'd have to. Consider that as to the benefits and risks, and in addition to some of the implications for what we have done, the commitments we have made, the implications now that we are where we are in the broader struggle that we are very much involved in, the message that it sends about U.S. commitment, about U.S. resolve, given what we have said and what we have done. So, that's certainly an option, but as I said, I regard that as a very risky option for us, and I do not favor it. But certainly that is an option.
I can't add anything to that. I totally agree. Bad idea. I appreciate the usefulness of thinking it through, but I do think it's a bad idea.
Right here in the middle.
Center for International Policy. Really appreciate this great discussion. Now, I've been following Afghanistan for an awfully long time, and not as long as you have, but I keep hearing.
Not as long as I have.
Every year since 2001,
we won't say how many years.
We're not quite ready to, the Taliban aren't ready to come to the table. We've got to degrade their fighting ability, and we've had this belief that time is really on our side. And Ambassador Khalilzad, you said that Taliban must be convinced the time is not on their side. Otherwise, there's no incentive to negotiate a political settlement. In fact, almost every year since 2001, our position has gotten weaker. But, we bought some time with the surge, but it's hard to say right now that, time's on our side. And I think I totally agree with Robin. There's got to be a political settlement, but there has to be much more of a sense of urgency on all parties, including the Americans, to bring this about. Because I never felt that the Obama administration was more than their commitment wasn't the sort of commitment I think that would bring about a settlement. So how do you add that? How do you, how do you convince all parties that a settlement is in their interest? And I think that can be done with the Taliban as well as the other parties.
Well, I think that I disagree with you that since 2001, time has been on their side. No, I disagree with that. I think that at least up to 2005, with the presidential election 2004, in fact, based on discussions with people who were close to the Taliban, time was not on their side. They saw an Afghanistan that was moving in the right direction. There was broad support. There was a lot of positive feeling all across Afghanistan that a new day was starting. But I think in 2005, it started to change. And the question is, one of the questions is, what happened that changed that? I happen to think there was a decision taken in Islamabad to make it to unleash this force that was being nurtured during those previous years. And now the idea of getting to a settlement, which we all say yes, nobody is here saying no settlement. You're raising the question, what is more conducive to a settlement? I see, frankly, again, two kind of options. I'm sure there are others, but two that come to my mind. One is that Pakistan changes. If I am correct about the importance of the role of Pakistan, that for its own strategic reasons, for national interest reasons, decides that they will help with a political settlement, but no more military use of Pakistan for those who do not want a political settlement. This is just too dangerous for Pakistan national interests. We can get, if our legitimate interests are, through a negotiated settlement. If their interest is that Taliban should have a role in the political process, the Afghan government, whether we like it or not, they are saying they will do it. They just agreed with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar to come into the reconciliation process, who was one of the insurgent leaders dating back to the 1980s, was regarded as a hardliner. They're saying they made a reconciliation agreement with him. So Taliban, or how different are they? Ambassador Haqqani talked about...
They're younger than Hekmatyar right now. So.
Some of them are the soldiers, but some of the... Ayatollah, I don't know how much younger he is, but in any case, there is a model, for example. There is a unity government with two forces. Why couldn't you have another force added to it if there was a will to do it? It's not that the Afghan government does not want that. It is that the Taliban do not want that. The only meeting in which the Afghan government, the Chinese, us, and the Pakistanis participated in Mary near Islamabad, that the Talibs came to that meeting, they were accompanied by ISI officers. They brought them there.
But that may have been just to physically ensure their presence.
I think the current Pakistani ambassador chaired that meeting, who was here. If he was here, he would confirm that in my view, because it's a public knowledge. So if Pakistan decides, oh, fellas, we will help you get a political settlement, negotiations, you can come to the Serena Hotel in Islamabad and negotiate, but militarily, no more sanctuary allowed, or the balance shifts decisively on the ground where they come to a different judgment. And there may be in-between options. Those are the two scenarios. Unfortunately, you get sometimes settlements when the balance in the military phase is almost over. and we're not there yet. So what kind of a settlement can you get?
I've got several people whose hands have been up for a long time and
Sorry,
very little time, but
maybe you take them all at once.
I'll take your question and then yours. Yeah.
I'm an independent researcher. I'm wondering if the current constitutional discussions along the tribal borders with the Pakhtunkhwa and the Fatah have any bearing on Pakistan's pressure on the Pashtun tribes to bring them to reconciliation to the reconciliation process vis-a-vis the Taliban.
I don't think
No,
so. I think
that's more of an internal issue.
It's an internal issue. The Pashtun, the tribal areas have wanted to be, or at least some elements within the tribal areas have always wanted to be part of the province and get rid of the colonial relic called the Frontier Crimes Regulation. Have the constitutional protections of citizenship as well as the constitutional responsibilities. It's a difficult and complex process, but I don't think that is directly connected. Yeah. It may have an effect in another way, and which is that Pakistan's past deniability that the tribal areas are not completely under our control will probably erode, which may actually be a good thing from Pakistan's point of view, because then the temptation to use that deniability too frequently may diminish. But that's about the only impact. Yes, and then I'll let Dr. Weinbaum ask the last question.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting discussion. My name is Nazira Azim Karimi. I'm correspondent for Ariana Television Network. I'm from Afghanistan. I don't want to, express my feeling as a journalist, but as an Afghan woman, I totally agree with Dr. Khalilzad's opinion. Every single day I talk with a different congressman, senator at the U.S., and they are totally agree that Pakistan is a safe haven for the Taliban, all other insurgency. Why the United States government doesn't or didn't show a strong reaction, and especially for you, Dr. Khalilzad, Afghan embassy, people has a high expectation to do, because in the past, different way, diplomacy way, different kind of it didn't work. Do you think that there is any solution? Or also, what is the Pakistan relation with the United States? Just Afghan people has a expectation for United States to bring a little serious and strong pressure to Pakistan to change their policy toward Afghanistan.
Thank you
very
Ms.
much.
Yeah.
Well, we have discussed the complexity of U.S.-Pakistan relations. There are lots of factors involved. I have, as you know, have favored, even when I was in Afghanistan, I raised the issue of the sanctuary issue because I thought this was going to become a bigger problem unless we address it in a timely manner. But that doesn't mean it's easy to address. We have discussed the complexities. I'd have disagreed with my Afghan friends, including President Karzai at that time, who thought that we weren't doing anything on this issue because of some conspiracy theory that we wanted the war to go on because we want to justify our presence. He and I disagreed on that. It wasn't that the U.S. wanted sanctuaries in Pakistan. The U.S. wanted from those sanctuaries that the attack take place against the Afghan soldiers, against our own soldiers, against coalition soldiers, but that this was a tough issue on which there were differing opinions in the United States as how best to approach it. And some problems are very hard, and perhaps there are no easy solutions to them. Although I had my own personal perspective as to what would be the right approach, maybe with better promise of it working, but no guarantees that it would work. So I can understand, and I used to tell President Karzai, that I understand his frustration. I understand his desire for us to do more to deal with this problem. But to recognize it, that at least he was upset for a while that we were denying that a sanctuary existed, while privately we said, yes, it did exist. Publicly, we didn't. That caused them some confusion, but we had our own reasons because of the dependence that Robin in part was mentioning. So I understand the Afghan frustration, the Afghan concern very much, but reciprocally, I would like the Afghans to appreciate that it isn't some hostile attitude towards Afghanistan or some conspiracy theory about keeping this war going because that sort of has benefits for us. That I don't accept, as I'm always saying it on Afghan television when I'm in Afghanistan. I'm often on TV there pushing back on this issue, but I do believe that the Afghans have a legitimate concern on this issue.
And I will let Dr. Marvin Weinbaum ask the last question, but before that, I just have a minor observation. You said a little while ago that from after 9/11 and until 2005, the Taliban were not a factor in Afghanistan militarily, and that they were probably being prepared to be unleashed and were unleashed. What made the United States blind to the fact that a force was being raised that could threaten American as well as Afghan control? From 2001 to 2005, you had primacy. The Afghan forces were not even
created yet.
So what made you totally blind?
Well, I don't know whether we were blind. I mean, we are, we were a country of enormous capability, certainly, but it doesn't mean we know everything correctly at the right time. I mean, even for a country like us, we have limitations. It took us a while to understand it. I think Pakistan also, in my judgment, knows the Pakistan system, the Pakistan security system knows us very well, and knows how we do our business. So they were trying to intentionally to make sure that we are not as aware, and it took us a while. And two, I think they were cooperating with us on some key issues. That's the complexity that I think Robin perhaps was alluding to, which is that they were helping us on the war against Al-Qaeda. We were using for a while their facilities for operation. We were overflying Pakistani territory for operations. We were using their locks for getting supplies to Afghanistan. We had a good relationship with President Musharraf, who often expressed himself extremely well in terms that we could understand. And we couldn't, it took us a while to I think, appreciate that there may be, during the day he was our friend, but maybe at nighttime he had some other plans. But it took a while. And he himself now admitted that, of course, he was nurturing the Taliban. Although when we were there, he was saying, give me their phone numbers and their addresses. So it took us a while.
Do you want to address that?
I'm just going to make one point which hasn't been mentioned, and I think as most people would agree had an effect. And that is that we did get distracted. We got distracted.
Okay, with Iraq. Fair enough.
Intel-wise, I don't believe, I have to say this for a historic reason. Some people say that because we went to Iraq, we neglected Afghanistan. I say I went to Afghanistan after we had gone to Iraq. And again, Mr. Libby, a great American, is sitting there. That we got, not because I was important to go there.
Don't neglect anything.
No, but I got more assistance for Afghanistan, more attention than was the case before the Iraq thing. One thing that we did suffer, and I don't know whether some assets, limited number of assets, not a lot. Some assets were had to go because of the challenge. But otherwise, Afghanistan benefited, in my judgment, from Iraq because all of a sudden we unleashed so much resources that we got more resources for Afghanistan on the reconstruction front than we had before. We got the start of the Afghan buildup of Afghan security forces, which we hadn't done before the invasion of Iraq. So yes, you could make a case that some assets got distracted, but this popular myth that when we went to Iraq, we forgot about Afghanistan, and Afghanistan got neglected is not right.
But
It was,
policy-wise,
it was an analysis problem
Not
rather
really
than
true,
a
Robin. No.
hard intelligence problem. Okay.
Thank you.
We
Hussein.
on Afghanistan when I was there.
Have we in this discussion missed asking what is, I think, the crucial question?
Yes, sir.
Why has Pakistan continued to view the Taliban, Haqqanis in particular, as an asset? This could be a very rational, and should be a rational question, unless you believe that they just want to dominate Afghanistan.
Right.
They've been holding on to this asset since the beginning. So
Why do you think that, Marvin? You know.
well, that's well, let me exactly come to that.
I would like you to answer that.
Yeah. So the question is, will they not change their policy until they view the Taliban as a deficit, as a liability?
Right.
That would get them to change. So we have to ask, why have they done this?
What could change them to liability?
Okay.
Let me think.
I think what could change,
Yeah.
first of all, why have they done this?
Right.
They have wanted to keep in reserve friendly Pashtuns.
Right.
hedging.
They have wanted to keep them. Why? Because from day one, they never expected that the project in Afghanistan was going to succeed. They always felt that it was going to fracture. The international community would walk away. Whatever it is, it wouldn't work. They would fight among themselves. And therefore, they needed friendly Pashtuns to go back in and to provide them with a sphere of influence and more.
Sure.
So what is the answer? It seems to me none of this will work until they are convinced they don't need them as an asset. And I can't think of anything that works except the notion that they come to the conclusion that, in fact, Pakistan can succeed. And that's where our role comes in. Can we contribute to that? And until we are able to, I think, demonstrate that this is a going operation, I believe that all of our pressure here is not going to work because they still consider their national interest here. Afghanistan's the neighbor, is dependent upon that because otherwise India's there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, I mean, let me answer that as in 1989, the friendly Pashtuns included Sibghatullah Mujaddidi, Pir Gilani, they included Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. So they included Abdul Rabb Rasul Sayyaf. Basically, Pakistan, first of all, lost more and more friendly Pashtuns, and now thinks these are the only friendly Pashtuns. And your argument seems to me to be to just wait and see till these people also become a liability. I think that some of the other policies could actually make them into a liability, just as Hekmatyar became a liability eventually. Sayyaf decided that he wasn't going to remain with, when the Taliban came about, he decided he didn't want to stay with the Taliban, he wanted to cross over. It's a poor policy to try and have people from another country as proxies unless and until you can completely control them. And Pakistan cannot completely control any Afghans.
Well, one other thing, Marvin, would be good to get your comments on, maybe here or outside, because what President Ghani did after his election, I think probably, it's my view, I don't want to attribute it to him, and that he thought the way you are thinking, that maybe we Pashtuns and the now leading Afghanistan could, on behalf of the government, give Pakistan the kind of assurances that it is entitled to as legitimate as a national interest. And he did things that was politically very costly for him, and it didn't work. Why? I don't disagree with you in a fundamental way, because I think ultimately there has to be a mutual accommodation between Afghanistan and Pakistan, because there is no realistic alternative to that. The question is, how do we get from here to there? I think Afghans, and I know President Ghani quite well, and many other leaders, obviously, I know them quite well. They are much more willing. Those who are dominant. I'm not talking about all Afghan leaders, because there is as you know, it's very complex. I think the responsibility and the burden is more with Pakistan. If I know, to the best of my kind of analytic ability, I think the Afghans are willing.
Can I just add, because I think that what you see in Pakistan is they're pursuing two foreign policies. One foreign policy, and I think they've come to this, is to look at Afghanistan now and say, you know, a successful, prosperous, peaceful Afghanistan really would be in our interest.
Right.
If we could get it.
So that's the policy in the English language press, and let's go and...
I think Ghani went in with exactly that idea in mind.
Right.
We cannot succeed without Pakistan.
Right.
Therefore, we're going to try to solidify that.
Yeah.
He didn't have the political support. And
I
most important,
don't know
and that's the
whether
second.
You're right about that, though, Marvin, that it didn't work because he didn't have the political
It
support.
was one of, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be finished in a second.
Yeah.
The other policy is the one I've been talking about. So it has this one policy here, which is accommodation, cooperation. The other policy is, no, we need proxies, we need reserve. They're trying to pursue both policies at the same time, and they're contradictory.
Right.
They're contradictory.
Necessarily, though, Marvin, I wouldn't say they're necessarily contradictory.
Well, I say they're contradictory because the proxy policy assures that there cannot be that kind of stable, peaceful, prosperous Afghanistan.
And then will not get the government to ultimately accommodate. Now, Ghani has taken a much harder line in some way than President Karzai ever did.
Well, I think this is becoming an insider's discussion. Thank you both very much, and thank you very much to the audience as well. Thanks a lot.